Hey, what's up? It's Mark at Alchemist.camp, where we learn Elixir and Phoenix by building things. Today, we're going to continue the simple Phoenix LiveView app. This is episode number 11 of it, so if you're new to it, go to alchemist.camp/episodes and scroll down to simple Phoenix LiveView app setup. Or if you're new to Elixir, scroll all the way down to lesson 1 and start there. So, thing we're going to do today is we're going to set up Markdown conversion for our app, and that's so that we can enter podcast show notes in Markdown, and then those will be converted into HTML to display to all the viewers. And similarly, those same viewers will be able to write comments in Markdown, kind of like you can on Reddit, and it'll get converted to HTML. So the first thing we're going to need for that is we're going to need Earmark, which is a Markdown conversion library written by Dave Thomas. And if you're not familiar with him, he is the person who wrote Programming Elixir. Definitely check out that book. The other thing we're going to need is we're going to need HTML sanitize X. So HTML sanitize X, and that's basically it's an HTML sanitization library so that we can be sure that when some commenter is entering Markdown for their comment, they can't include a cross-site scripting attack or anything that would be really undesirable to have in the comment thread. So we'll save that with these two dependencies. Then we'll run mixdeps.get. I guess I already did that when preparing for the episode, so that's all good to go. Then we'll go to the top level of our library, and I'm going to copy in a fairly sizable module, most of which I don't think is that relevant to viewers, so I'm just going to kind of step through it quickly and explain what it does. That is Alchemist Markdown. And Alchemist Markdown is what I use to power Alchemist Camp. It started off in episode 6, I believe, Alchemy Markdown, or even a little before that. And it's got a number of rules, like a plus before and after a string of text will turn it into a big. So you could say like plus foo plus, and that'll turn into HTML big tags wrapped around foo. So it'll be written big. And similarly, a minus before and after something will turn it small, HTML small that is, and then 3 or more dashes or stars with any number of spaces between them will turn into a horizontal rule. I'll actually just show you an example of that now. So we'll just put a horizontal rule here. So we'll say dash, and then I'll do another horizontal rule after some text, doing star, more spaces, star, and save that. And you'll see we have a couple of nice horizontal rules. That's actually pretty nice. It's a big time saver, which is why I made it. In fact, that's why I did all the extensions I did. It just makes it faster for me to write articles and publish those episode pages. So I'm going to paste in an extracted portion of Alchemist Markdown. This is not everything that's going on in Alchemist Camp, because Alchemist Camp also has stuff for showing specific timestamps. Like you can see, I've got these timestamps going to certain times of the video of this episode. So this is the episode's YouTube video link, and here's a timestamp linked at a certain time. And I made a helper to just make it way easier than that. What we can do instead of that is if I want a link to the video at, say, time 4:12, I just type that, and it will be converted into all of this, plus a small class around it. I hadn't written this helper at the time of making that video, but you can see I've got 4:12. Click on it, and boom, we're at 4 minutes and 12 seconds into that video. So there are a lot of helpers in Alchemist Camp that we don't really need for a simple podcast show displaying site. So that's why I've cut it down a bit. So basically, the important part here is earmark.asHTML with earmark options. That's the library we included that does the markdown conversion, that turns some markdown that it took in into HTML. The options I pass in are, one is this code class prefix. That's just so that when there's a triple backtick block of code, whatever language I specified at the top of those triple backticks, like say in this article here where I'm talking about Prism, here where I'm explaining how to use Prism, for this block where I say add code to the page, this is actually HTML. So I put in backtick, 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 HTML, and if I inspect the element, you can see it says language-HTML in a CSS class, and that lets things like Prism recognize it and know how to syntax highlight it. So that's what this one does. Smartypants, if you don't set Smartypants to false, Earmark will do a bunch of conversions that its author likes, but I don't like. For example, it'll turn minus minus that I'm using for the smalls tag into an M dash or an N dash, I forgot which one, but one of the longer dashes. And it'll turn quotes into fancy quotes and stuff like that. So this step converts all the markdown to HTML. Then the other steps are things that I've added. The HTML sanitize to prevent various attacks and make sure that the HTML that's being outputted is sanitized and safe to put on your site. Smalls, as I explained, adds those small tags. Bigs does the big tag conversion. Divs is kind of complicated. Earmark doesn't have a way for you to put a class on a div, so I did some matchers, and so that you could basically just write div dot and some stuff and get or colon div dot and then some classes and have CSS classes. Smalls and bigs, since that conversion's happening after the earmark conversion, I made another function called ReplaceUnlessPre, and what this does, it looks more complicated than it is, but it just matches some pre blocks. So this will match a pre tag, and this matches the closing pre tag. The reason this is simpler is because you can't have like a class or an ID or anything like that in the closing tag, whereas the opening tag could have a bunch of stuff before it has the closing bracket. All the stuff that's in the middle of the pre tag here gets split out. So we're basically doing this regex split to split the entire document into pre-tag blocks and stuff that is not pre-tag blocks. And then I've got the text, which is passed in, and I've got a regular expression, which is passed into this function. And then we have all these strings that have been split out. Some of them are pre-tag blocks, some of them aren't. We check each of them to see if they are a pre-tag block. If they are, we just return exactly that string. Don't do anything to it. If they are not a pre-tag block, then we do the regular expression replacement from the regex that was passed in. And then at the end, we've got all of these, we've got this list of strings. It's basically all the split strings with the replacement done to the stuff that was not in a pre-tag block, and the pre-tag blocks left alone. Then we join it back together into the big main string, and functions like smalls can use this ReplaceUnlessPre, pass in some text, and then every instance of something wrapped in a couple of minus signs on each side will be turned into a small unless that's inside a pre-block. That way you can have a code block on your screen that includes, say, N++ or something, and that won't be interpreted as the beginning of a big tag, or N-, won't be interpreted as the beginning of a small tag. Then I've got strip tag. This one's pretty simple. We just match for some tag, and notice this is interpolated. This is from a variable passed in. So I could say strip tag, then the text of the entire blog post, and then say div. And then this matcher would match all of the divs, and it would see what's in the middle of the divs, and then it would return just what was in the middle without those div tags. So you can imagine using this for stripping out an H1 tag, or stripping out an image tag, or whatever kind of tag you don't want to be included from user entered text. And this H3 is max is very similar to this, but instead of stripping out H1s and H2s, what it does is it matches H1s. So here's the opening H1, here's the closing H1, here is any amount of anything in between them. Parentheses around it are to match. We just return an opening and closing H3 tag with everything in between. And the reason you don't see the closing bracket here is because we're actually matching all of this. So we're matching the closing bracket of the opening H1 and the opening bracket and the slash from the closing H3 tag. So then the second line is doing almost the exact same thing again. We had this text that was passed in, and then we reassigned that variable to this replacement that's turned all the H1s into H3s, and then we turn all the H2s into H3s. This is used so that commenters can have some minor headings in their comments, but they can't put an H1 or an H2 in the middle of a comment thread, because that would be really disruptive. Then finally, at the high level, which should make perfect sense now, we get some markdown in, then we add HRs based on those rules. We add divs with classes based on this rule. Then we convert everything to markdown. We sanitize it. Then we convert the stuff surrounded by double minus into smalls, and the stuff surrounded by double plus into bigs, except if it's inside of a pre-block. So that's the whole thing. I'll post this whole module into the episode page once it's up, but you get the basic idea. I'm just customizing how this markdown converter works, and I'm adding a few more things onto it that I want. So with this module saved, we can fire up iex-s mix phoenix.server, and we can try it out. We could say string equals, so we can make a new string and say something like, hi, I'm very pleased to meet you, exclamation point. And then we can convert this very customized markdown into HTML. So Alchemist Markdown .to HTML, and now we see we've got the paragraph wrapping around it. That's from Earmark, and we have the big tag here. Then we could try changing the string. Maybe don't close it there, make another line and put some dashes in it, and then something tiny with a small tag. Then we close the string and convert that, and you'll see we've got an HR from those dashes. We've got the small tag. So this looks ready to use. Now let's look at our podcast pages. We'll go to localhost 4000, and we see everything set up here. Now let's have a look at this page. So the show notes, we see our HTML that was already created. So notice that this markdown is in notes MD, and we're showing notes HTML. But if we were to remove this notes HTML, then we were to edit the markdown, say I just add another line at the bottom and then save it, that doesn't update the HTML. The HTML is just what it was. The markdown is not being used to do anything. So what we want to do is we want to make it so if the markdown is changed, then the HTML also updates. And now that we have this module in here, it's actually pretty quick to do. So the simple way would be to go to podcast show, and we can just change this notes HTML to notes MD. That would put the markdown directly on the page, which is not super interesting. But then if we pass this to Alchemist Markdown, it's going to convert it to HTML and look pretty much exactly like what we want. So now we're getting the HTML from the markdown, and it's great. The only problem is this markdown module is not optimized. I'm wrapping a library which was already not fast. I mean, it's not like CBark. It's not written in C or anything. And then I'm wrapping it in my own transformations, some of which will definitely get slow if the text is large. We don't want to do this for every single visitor. In my tests on Alchemist Camp, I could get about 100 requests per second, or I could handle about 100 requests per second doing it this way. But without the markdown conversion, it could handle about 1,000 requests a second. So it's still going to be faster than a lot of sites, a lot of normal sites that you would be running if you had, say, Python or maybe Ruby or PHP on your server, but it's wasteful. So what we're going to do instead of that is we're going to be reading notes HTML instead of notes markdown, but we're going to convert notes markdown to notes HTML anytime the markdown is changed. So we'll go to podcast, and we're going to make our change set so that it no longer requires is published or notes HTML. It just requires audio URL, the markdown notes, subtitle, and the title. And then we'll add a step that will generate the HTML from the markdown. We're going to make a new function called genNotes, and we'll have two versions of this. They're private functions. So what genNotes will do is it will match if the change set is valid, so valid true, and the markdown has been updated. So inside changes, we'll have notes MD, and we'll capture that as text, and then we'll capture the entire change set as change set. And if both of those are true, then we'll put a new change and update the notes HTML. And we'll update that with Alchemist Markdown .toHTML of text. So basically, whenever it's a valid change and we've updated the notes markdown, we generate new notes HTML. That way we only do this expensive Alchemist Markdown conversion when we write to the database. But when visitors look at the show notes, we don't go through any of that. Then we need another version of the function for when that doesn't match. And this one will just be a one-liner. We'll match everything, and we'll just return the change set unchanged. So for example, let's say we have a valid change set, but they only updated the show's title. Well, there's no need to regenerate the markdown or the HTML show notes. So we'll save that. And what is, oh, valid has a question mark, of course. Okay, so with that saved, now the squigglies are gone, and let's try removing that extra line I added to the bottom of the markdown. Save it, and we've generated new HTML. So whatever changes we make to this markdown will show up. We could just make a horizontal rule in here. Whatever we want to do should be good. Is there? Oh, there is an HR. It's just white and almost impossible to see. So maybe we should add that style right now. So app.css or SCSS, and so we'll make a rule for HRs, and say that the color is going to be gray. And that changed nothing because HRs are going to be border color is what's going to show up. Okay, that's not quite the color we want. Yeah, we'll just make it the same color as the text. That's the easiest solution for now. I'll readdress it later. Okay, so we've got Markdown editing and all is looking pretty reasonable. That's a good spot to stop for today. See you next episode.